Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. I'm a recovering political hack and recovering lawyer. Spent many years working in politics, including stints as a speechwriter. I worked in the Clinton White House for a California governor. I also spent years practicing law in Silicon Valley. You know, in 2010, I discovered the medium of podcasting, and I've been in love with it ever since. Over 10 years of hosting this show, I've had the privilege to talk to top CEOs, founders, authors, speakers, entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies, from YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, OpenTable, you name it. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses with the strategy and the production they need to create a podcast that produces tremendous ROI and connects them with their ideal prospects and referral partners. And so I'm excited today because, first of all, shout out to my friend Jordan Harbinger of the Jordan Harbinger Show. Go check out his podcast. It's one of the best one out there on the interwebs. He's really a leader in podcasting. But I connected with today's guest because of Jordan. Today's guest, Brendon, heard me on his show many years ago. We connected. We've hung out in person many times. And he's just one of my favorite people. And his name, this guest, is Brendon Lemon. And The Power Bible is the name of his new book, which we're going to dive into that. We're also going to talk about, maybe get his opinion on the state of politics right now. We're recording this in September 2020 on the eve of the 2020 election. Coronavirus is happening. He's also a comic. He's been a comic for many, many years now. He had a lot more courage than me at age 16, I think, 15, something like that. He first got on stage and been addicted ever since. So we'll talk about comedy and all that kind of fun stuff. But first, before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media. Rise 25 helps B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. You know, you're listening to this, and we know by you listening to this that you like podcasts, right? If you've ever thought about starting a podcast, I say you absolutely should do it. And we specialize in helping B2B businesses with a high client lifetime value to make it super profitable. So to learn more, go to rise25media.com. All right, Mr. Lemon. So I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to interview you for the show. And first of all, so your new book is called The Power Bible. What's a comic doing writing a book about how to get power? How did that come about?
So the tagline, first of all, what's up, John? Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it, man.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
You were once you've heard about this book for 2 years because I've told you about it being in process. And I was very flattered that you asked to have me on because I very much respect you and everything that you're doing. So thank you very much for having me on here.
Thank you, sir.
So what is a comic doing writing a book about power? So let's define sort of two things. The first is the tagline for the book is The Power Bible is a book about how to win conversations that matter. So that's kind of the concept. And the second is, what does power mean? What is power? And we define power in the book as the ability to affect meaningful change in the world. So what does that mean? It means meaning is whatever sort of you defined it as. And all power over others ultimately boils down to having power over yourself in order to first influence yourself and then influence others. So the book is kind of a breakdown of conversations that me and my co-author, William Petit III, who's a comedian and a lawyer, have been having over many years, and really decided to distill this into a single book that we sort of wish we had when we started out trying to understand ourselves and how to influence and impact others. And comedy is almost the perfect dojo for that, because the world of comedy is a constant sort of frame battle back and forth with an entire room full of people. And if you don't outframe them, if you don't lead them to where you want them to go, they won't laugh. They won't get the joke. You're going to bomb on stage. Your life is going to get ruined. You'll walk off. You'll lose self-respect. Your wife will leave you, and ultimately you'll die poor and lonely. Everybody knows that.
Explain this. What do you mean by this concept of outframing them? That's an interesting term for those who don't know.
Yeah. So the concept at the core of the Power Bible is the concept of frame control, which is a frame is defined basically as the context around which the data appears. So the context around which the data is encapsulated is sort of a way to think about it. So the easiest way to explain this is you have a frame in any given situation. What is the frame of you going into an interview? You could see potentially someone walking in, sitting down, answering questions about their career, but what that means is explained by the greater context around it. So it could very well be that you've been asked to come to an interview and sit down because this company wants to recruit you, and you have a great career and you don't want to leave your company, and they're ready to offer you anything, everybody and their mother, everything in the kitchen sink, just to try to get you into the company. That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it, that is the context around which the interview is occurring. It could be that you need a job really badly, and you were not qualified, and you've been unemployed for months. And I mean, this is kind of a scary reality maybe we're all going through. The way you behave in that interview might not necessarily change exactly the context of it, but it actually could influence the outcome of it. So a way to think about framing is, how are you thinking about the data? The data itself is not the meaning. The meaning is given by the context around which the data occurs. So, getting pulled over by a police officer is another one. Are you speeding? Are you acting suspicious? Do you have something you're afraid of? These things are all sort of contextual frames around which a traffic stop can occur. And the way that you're behaving in that situation is both affected by the frame and also influences the frame. So the two things are kind of interdependent. A really good way that we break it down in the book, just to beat this concept to death and make sure that everybody's clear on it, is a judge in a courtroom has ultimate frame. The judge in a courtroom has all kinds of frames given to him or her by the Constitution, by the law in which the state in which the judge is presiding over the courtroom in. But as soon as the judge leaves the courtroom, the judge loses all those frames. As soon as the judge walks into another courtroom, the judge does not have frame any longer. As soon as the judge walks out to their car and sees that their car is on fire, the person who has ultimate frame in that situation is probably the fireman who shows up to put the car out.
Right.
So
right.
This is kind of...
And so to extend that metaphor even further, if you're a comic on stage, you have to be that judge. You have to define the frame, and every word counts, right? Like a misplaced word here, using the wrong word to describe here, affects the frame. Am I right about that?
That's exactly true. And so words matter. So that's one of the things we talk about in the book a lot, is that words actually do matter. And so it's funny because in our political situation right now, there's a lot of people who are talking about, on the left and right, what words mean what things. And a lot of what's happening is a big frame battle nationally between competing tribal camps that are trying to outframe and define nationally what these terms mean. And maybe I'm being vague, but a specific example of this is like the term racism, for example. This is this is really relevant, and definitely a thing that two white dudes should talk about on a podcast.
Exactly. No, I mean, it's actually the first thing that came to mind as well, because here we're recording this in September 2020. There's been some would say, there's different ways of describing it, but there's been a social justice movement. Some people describe it that way. Other people describe it as unrest in our cities, or they describe it as some other way. And how you describe it, the words you use to describe what has happened, it carries a lot of power, and it affects people's perception of who you are as well.
Let's talk about two specific examples here, because the one I was going to use, and then you just said, how you describe this, that will lead us into talking about presidential debates, which just happened. But last night, I'm still recovering. I feel like I'm in a hangover from the president. How do you watch? It's almost like you were at a party and you watched two people arguing, And then you left the party and you were like, why do I feel like I'm shitty for having been? Like, I feel like I was in the splash zone last night to that presidential debate.
Casualty
like,
of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let me say this though, is that, so racism is a specific example. So that people who are on the left of this debate now, people who those on the right would describe as like cultural Marxists or something, would say, look, racism is a system of oppression that operates through institutions of power that deny access and oppress while giving privileges to certain classes of people. And as a result, it's impossible for a person who is oppressed, like a person of color, to be racist because they don't participate in the systems of oppression themselves. They've never been given access by which to then in turn oppress other people. But then there are other people who I would say traditionally use the definition of racism who go, that's not true. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. Racism is hating someone else based on the color of their skin or something. I would say that's the simple working definition of racism we've had since, the 1950s at least, but it's attempting to be redefined by people on the left. Whether or not you agree with that is a completely other argument, but that's what's attempting to happen. And that's because they're trying to define the term in order to control the frame of the debate. And those things are important. Like, it is actually important to figure out what that term means.
Yeah. So, I started my career as a speechwriter. And so I knew then that the words that you choose to describe and to frame any topic were incredibly important. One of the things, I worked in the Clinton White House. One of the things I admired about President Clinton is that any debate about taxes wasn't about taxes. It was about priorities. It was about schools, or it was about kids, or it was about health insurance. He would change it to talking about those sorts of things. And that really mattered. It reframed the debate. And, whether you like him or hate him, President Trump, the last few years, I think the reason that he, defeated something like 16 other Republicans who'd been in office for many years to get the nomination was because he defined and framed the debate and was able to, successfully do that.
He changed the nature. It's strange because it's a good way to return to kind of the point that I was making about how we're going to move into talking about the presidential debates, because he has created it's almost like there was a black hole that flew through the universe of American politics, and he's warped the environment around him. Is how it's been, because there's been a lot of conversation. People who are traditionally Republican, I've talked about this on more than one podcast now, but my dad voted for Trump, and I think he voted for Trump for reasons that were intelligible in 2016, but they are now unintelligible. That the ecosystem has been warped such that those points no longer matter, that people were interested in voting him for. So I think it's just been a fascinating, but he definitely, Scott Adams wrote a book about it, about how Trump was a master persuader. But it's interesting. if you parse out things that he's saying, he talks at a 5th grade level, which, turns out is great for communicating with most Americans. Yeah. He's able to create imagery that frames opponents in a specific kind of way. And he tends to end sentences in a specific kind of way that feels resonant with the points he's making. Or I guess if you were to agree that he's even making points.
Yeah. Well, a lot of orators are like that. They have the ability to say in a declarative fashion, make statements that if you read them, you don't hear them, you read them on paper, it's not really saying anything, or it's not as definitive. You see that frequently with people, and they earn others' respect as an orator or as a thought leader, an opinion leader, or something like that, just in the way that they state opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's run his ship in that respect, has run aground, because the debate last night was just a complete travesty. It was insane it was actually insane. It was outside of the bounds of credulity that it strained sanity beyond its breaking point. I feel
It certainly did. Yeah. I think a lot of people are saying that today. So what, from, your research into the book, what are your thoughts on the debate in terms of the way that the frame was controlled by either of the candidates and how the narrative was controlled?
Yeah, it's fascinating because so that's a really good question, because the best way that I heard it, so Trump, it's fascinating to me because we talk in the book how there are, Aristotle talks about how there's, three different parts of communication: ethos, pathos, and logos. So there's ethics, what kind of person are you? Pathos, what kind of emotions are you arguing with? And then logos, what are the actual points you're making. We talk about this a bit in the book, which is that you need to be conscious of how you're how you're doing something is as important as what you're doing. And I think that Trump destroyed nearly all of his points that he was attempting to make, which maybe some, let's grant that some of them were even potentially decent in terms of arguing against Joe Biden, just by continuing to not, for part of my French, just shut the hell up. Like he continued to run over everything that Biden was trying to say, even Chris Wallace even. And I think to myself, if you're a moderate American, if you're not already on Trump's train, one of the things that would probably push you out of wanting to vote for him is thinking, this guy just doesn't listen to anybody. He runs over everything he says. How well is he going to consider any points that you as a member of the citizenry want him to consider that he hasn't already thought about if he's acting like this on stage? And I think that behavior undermined and destroyed his own frame. So when you look at a lot of the news, I'm a big subscriber to Ground News. It's a great app. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's basically, it attempts to pull together a whole bunch of news from left, right, and center and talk about which stories are being covered by what areas of the news. I pay like $10 a month for it. It's a spectacular service. It produces something that allows you, it gets a read on whatever your political leanings are, and it goes, you probably read these publications, so here's a handful of publications that you don't normally read to show you news stories you're missing or a different perspective on them, which is something I really value, so I don't mind paying for it. A lot of the news was all about defining and attempting to define the frame post the debate as Trump basically is like a big baby who can't control himself. And I think that if you're a reasonable person at all, that's the takeaway you had from the debate.
Let's talk about, you've been a comic for so many years, and I have so much respect for that. My father did stand-up comedy dating back to before I was born, and even when I was younger. And I have so much respect for people that get on stage. But, political comedy in particular, especially in the context of what we're talking about here, framing the narrative is so challenging, because it, again, in comedy in general, every word, the way that you frame things is important. But when you step over the third rail and you address a topic that's already fraught with even more emotions, even more challenging, I imagine, to do political comedy and to do political jokes, especially in a room where maybe you're not sure where people lean.
Oh yeah, dude, it's a minefield.
Yeah. So talk a little bit. I mean, how do you frame in an audience of strangers? How do you frame political comedy and get laughs? When you have an audience of people and you have no idea where they're leaning.
Well, okay. So the answer to that question is that there's two answers to this question. The first caveat to say to it is that if you listening can provide an answer to this question that is right 100% of the time, congratulations, you are the greatest comedian who's ever lived. There is no answer to this question such that it will work in every situation. So it's lame to be like, I wrote a book about how to do this, and then like you ask a question about how to do it, and I'm like, it's not. Good luck. But the truth is that there is just no way to know. You know what I mean? You're in a frame battle with an entire audience full of people. There's no way you're going to win them all over. You're going to step on. You're dancing in a minefield. This is why the greatest comedians on the planet, like Dave Chappelle. I mean, even you go watch his specials. He runs into jokes that people in the audience don't like. So how you surf that wave is how you respond when the audience doesn't like what you just said is actually what makes you a great comic.
I mean, sometimes those are the best moments too.
No,
you know,
I live for that.
Oh yeah, when you see Dave Chappelle got a joke that's killed every time, and comes the Netflix special, and then it's like, oh, that's over the line. Like,
yeah, Bill Burr in Paper Tiger, and his last special, he definitely did this hit in spades. He was up on stage telling jokes, and you could tell, you're like, oh man, this audience does not like his material tonight. And he's just, and it's like he's filming his Netflix special. Like, what is he gonna do? So I mean, that really shows you, you know, Johnny Carson said you can judge the quality of a comedian by how well he bombs. And I think there's a ton of truth to that. That's how you decide the mettle of a comic. Okay, the second answer to that question, though, which is the real answer, is it's all about point of view, which is how can I get the audience, and this is why frame control is important to comedy and why comedy is like the perfect dojo for it, because how can I get the audience to see what I see in this moment, and what combination of words can I use to shepherd their consciousness from one position to another position, so that when they look at this, they also see the juxtaposition and incongruity that I see, which I think is funny. And
doing so doesn't require them to change who they are. Doing so just I'm guessing, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it just requires them to see the humor in the way that you see it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. So it's like, you know, you cannot attack, you can't make an audience member feel attacked at the level of who they are or that their beliefs or something. I mean, this is why comedy is so important here, is because, and why, in a way, it's perfect that comedians had to write, you know, me and my co-author had to be comedians to write this book, is because you know, the essence of comedy comes from the idea that there is a tension, which is something, what's going to happen? Is something good going to happen? Is something bad going to happen? What's going to happen? And then a release of that tension at delight. So if you think about a baby, you know, if as a parent, you do this thing where you put your hands in front of your face, and your baby's like, "Oh, I'm gone," and your baby's like, "Holy shit, where did my you know, dad, mom go?" Yeah. And then you go, "Oh, it's me. I'm right here. It's just me. It's your dad." Yeah. And then you know, your kid starts laughing. The essence of comedy comes from the idea that there is a tension of surprise, and then a delight at the relief of a positive relief at that surprise. So comedy has to take place around tension, and when it's done poorly, the surprise is bad, and people dislike it, and then you get booed, and then you never get booked again, and you die poor and lonely. This is a necessary conclusion. Or you get it right, and everybody's laughing, and then everybody goes home and gets laid. So these are the way it works. Yeah. Just, I know. Big consequences. We're all gonna get laid. I love Rodney Dangerfield. So anyway, the point that I'm making here, though, is that like that comes from, you know, that's the essence of comedy. So there's a way, you know, you can't make someone feel too much tension. You can't make someone feel like they've got too much you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Too much flesh in the game. You know what I mean? Because if they do, they won't follow you. They simply will be like, "No, I'm getting off the ride here." Now, I have a joke. I've talked about this a couple of times because I think it's a good example. So I have a joke where I talk about, you know, I have to, I'm walking through, this is before Donald Trump got elected. I knew he was going to get elected because I was walking through the Pride Festival in Chicago. It was the Pride Festival. And I heard someone say, "There are too many N-words in Chicago today." And I heard somebody say that there are too many N-words in Chicago, but that's not exact. You know, here's the thing. That's exactly what they said. They didn't use the term. They didn't use the word. The term N-word refers to. They used the term N-word, and it was in that moment that I was like, "Holy shit! You can be racist and politically correct at the same time. Like black is white, up is down." So that joke continues, and I just go on. I have like a bunch of other punchlines to it. If I haven't done the requisite amount of rapport building with an audience before getting into that joke, they'll get off the ride at me saying N-words. I didn't say the word the term refers to. Right, but even referring to it, yeah. Even gesturing to the gesture that gestures to the word is too much for a lot of people. They're like, "Nope, too much tension. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't want to get on this ride."
So what's the
And
rapport building look like in the build up to that? What are you doing?
yeah, so that's a good question. So the rapport building that gets up to that joke is I have to do a number of other jokes, and it might not really matter what they are. I just have to get the audience to trust that they're like, okay, this guy's we trust him. He's going to take us to places that we know are okay. And if I don't do that, then they will get off the ride right there.
So it doesn't matter what the other jokes leading up to it are?
Well, I mean, ideally it almost doesn't. I mean, the answer to the question is it almost doesn't, in the sense that if you are continuing to get laughter from the crowd, they'll start following you mostly wherever you want them to go.
Okay.
But I will say that I don't want to be doing a whole bunch of subject matter about nothing controversial at all. Like,
And then step into that.
Yeah, the funny thing about puppies and kittens.
Yeah.
Let's talk about.
Let's do a racism joke.
Exactly. Let's talk about giving your grandmother a hug. Now let's talk about N-words. Like, it's just like, whoa, holy shit! Wait a minute. Like,
that was the right turn. So you got to kind of you step into it. You step into it with.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so I mean
So the audience is kind of realizing this guy's a little edgy. He's a little edgy. He's a little off-putting, or he's but
we trust. We trust that he is our best idea, best
interesting part. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we can trust that we're gonna. It's about leadership. So this is the other thing: is that Frame Control is about leadership. Comedy is about leadership. Mm-hmm. What you're doing as a comedian is you're stepping on stage. You're creating a tribe with the people who are in the room, and then you're leading that tribe. That's what Frame Control is about. And if somebody's not on board, like, I mean, and this is what will happen. If you're doing edgy material, like if you're doing edgy material that you're working out as stage as a comedian, it won't work. You will run into it not working. You'll be at open mics. You'll try to get people on board with the joke. There's nothing there. I have another joke. Everybody in your audience is going to think I'm just like a total douchebag comic. But I have another joke where I go, did you guys know, I mean, I'm still working on this joke, but the setup is, did you guys know that there are over 1 billion Chinese people? Did you guys know that? Like 1 out of every 7 people on the planet is Chinese. Like, when are we going to say enough is enough? Like, it's a ridiculous joke. And the only reason it works is if you I'm being ironic, you know?
Yeah.
But I would, same thing. If I don't build up a persona of like, this guy's irreverent and ironic, and I just get into that joke, the crowd is like, what the hell are you trying to say, dude?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Well, that's your moment as a comedian to go get off stage, go back to your notebook, continue writing jokes to try to figure out how you can palatably get into that situation.
Yeah.
Without breaking rapport too much, because what you're doing is you're getting on stage and you're being out-framed by the audience who's like, we're not on board with this. We're not laughing at this. This isn't funny.
I want to ask you about the flip side of this, which is dismantling the other side's frame, and we can continue talking about in the political context or debate context, because oftentimes the other side is trying to create its own frame and you need to dismantle it or attack it or something like that, which you write about in the book. So talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a number of ways to do this, but the 2 strongest ways are either zooming in or zooming out, meaning, and that's just the quick monikers that me and my co-author have given to this. I mean, there's a number of ways to do it, but zooming in involves, let's get into the details. Let's talk about the data. Let's look at what in specific where the point you're making plays out, or let's zoom out, meaning let's get away from that and let's talk about larger concepts like morality or character or, things like this. I mean, broadly speaking, those are sort of the 2 ways to deal with dismantling somebody else's frame that they're trying to foist upon you. Now, in a debate, that's what I would do. Interpersonally, this becomes a little more complicated because, the way to dismantle somebody's frame interpersonally, that when sort of the stakes aren't as specific as a debate, is just refuse the frame. Just don't assent to it. You know what I mean? If you don't have to, if it's low stakes, just don't do it. If somebody's trying to talk to you about something you don't want to agree with, you just don't have to do it. I mean, I think that small amount of what's the word I'm looking for? Dissonance that you're going to create is going to be enough to push space in, and you can retain your own frame. But in a situation where things really matter, like a courtroom or a debate or et cetera. Those are sort of, broadly speaking, the two movements that you kind of want to do in order to dismantle somebody else's frame. And then you want to, once you have done that, the second and very important point is to insert your own, then put in your own frame. So like the way that, and just speaking about it like briefly, the way that people who have been falsely tried and convicted of crimes they didn't commit get off is by not only dismantling what happened wrong with the case that took place previously, but then inserting a new narrative going, it couldn't have been this guy because here's actually the version of events that explain the crime that took place. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So like, you want to zoom in or zoom out, getting into the details or getting away from them by appealing to something either in specific or broadly that sort of overarchingly gets rid of the details, depending on the situation, which we can get into. And then you want to insert sort of your own frame or your whatever your take is, and you want that to sort of take in the space. Does this make sense, John?
It does. I wanted to ask it in the context of another topic which you have expertise in, which is sales. So we've been talking about this discussion in the context of political debates, the world of comedy, now wrongful conviction in a court of law. Somehow we got onto that one too. But let's go over to sales, because everyone needs to sell. Whether you are working for yourself or you're selling a colleague or a coworker on an idea, or you're selling to clients or something like that. So let's talk about these ideas of framing in the world of sales and how you utilize that and how these principles apply there.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to get into this is to talk about how I got into sales, because your listeners are probably like, why is this comedian, what is he? Is he a comedian? Is he a guy who he keeps talking about law for some reason?
He's a criminal defense attorney somehow?
Yeah, what the fuck is he talking about, this guy? All of those would be reasonable questions to ask. So here's my background. I've been doing stand-up comedy for almost 20 years. I started when I started doing improv when I was 14. I did it for 14 years. I had two uncles who were stand-up comics. Started doing stand-up when I was 16 in Metro Detroit, and have done it almost all over the world. Even as you know, I funded a self-funded pilot trying to explore comedy around the world, which may or may not end up on a TV channel. We're still working through that. But in that time, I also have a degree in philosophy and studied pre-law, was going to go to law school. I'm glad I didn't do that. Literally everybody in my life told me not to. I think I had one person who was like, yeah, go to law school. And literally everyone else was like, don't do it, dude. Unless you enjoy doing homework for a living, you should not do it. So that's how those things came about. But what I did end up doing is getting into sales. And part of the reason I did that was that I learned, was to be perfectly honest, part of the reason I did that was because of poverty. You don't make a lot of money unless you're a successful comedian. Comedy is a pretty hard life. And I decided I wanted, shoes that didn't have holes in them. So I got a day job doing sales. And what I learned was that a lot of lessons that I had learned in comedy in terms of building rapport, framing an audience, word choice, etc., those actually applied really strongly to the world of sales. And I think we talked about that the first time we ever did a podcast together. And and that's sort of where that experience sort of leads into sales. So what you want to understand in the world of sales in terms of frame control is that the person who, there's been a lot of books written about leadership in sales. The person who holds the strongest frame is typically the one who ends up winning a conversation, winning a debate. And the person who has the strongest frame is the one who wins the sale. So one of two things is going to happen, as Grant Cardone says, which is either you're going to sell the person on the other end of the phone on that they need your service or product, or they're going to sell you on that they don't. One of those two things is going to happen. So, Ziegler says the transference of emotion is what sales is. And so in that way, whoever has the strongest frame and is the most convicted is going to be the one who wins that. So if it's the salesperson, they're going to get a lot of sales. It's just going to happen. So understanding sort of how to win over a prospect from a frame control perspective is how the conversation continues. I think that's a way of answering that question without even answering it, if I'm right.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of those things that, people struggle with, is that idea of how to control a conversation without being overwhelming or rude or, too salesy, which people are afraid of, that sort of thing. And any further thoughts on that, or on these principles and how to leverage it when you're doing sales?
Yeah, I mean, so what you want to do is, the first step is getting sold on your product. I mean, your product or service. So if you're a salesperson, or if you're trying to think about how do I encourage myself to do sales, you really need to believe that you're adding value to somebody's life. So you need to do whatever work you need to do to figure out if you're doing that and how you're doing it and how much you're doing. So, if you're a graphic designer, I mean, this is a good example. Is my sister's a graphic designer. She done a ton of graphic design work, and until recently, she wasn't really sure how much she should charge for service. She's just not sure if she wants to push it on somebody. For someone who's producing their work themselves, it can sometimes be difficult to be sold on yourself, especially because you can see all the flaws in the things that you create. You know what I mean? You're not even sure how you should value yourself, etc. She did a lot of the really hard work where she investigated what her work had done for her clients. She had compared her work to other people in the marketplace. And she finally was like, you know what? I know I'm offering something valuable here. So I'm happy to charge people. I'm happy to push it on people. I became a successful salesperson at a mobile marketing startup because I did a lot of work to understand that we were the best product in the marketplace. That if someone was choosing to go with another platform in the mobile marketing, marketing technology universe, they were making a bad decision. And I had no problem sort of holding that frame and telling people that. You have to do it persistently and politely, but telling somebody directly and confidently, like, look, if you don't take a meeting with us, you're going to miss out on at least things that you're not going to know about the competitor you're going to try to go with. I mean, it's worth 15 minutes, here's the deal. At the end of that meeting, we don't have to continue talking if you don't like my product, but you will be better informed. You're going to learn these 5 things. I'll send it to you in an email. Take a look. I'm sending you a meeting request. You can feel free to move it to whatever time works. Or if you change your mind after looking at my email, you can cancel it, but I'm promising you this is going to be worth your time. Like these kinds of things you have to get sold on first. That's actually the biggest part of the book is, we talk a lot about techniques in the second and later part of the book. How do you zoom in? How do you zoom out? How do you dismantle frame? How do you enforce somebody else's frame? But a huge part of the book is just focused on how do you get sold and master your own inner frame, because a lot of this, especially in the world of sales, is going to manifest spontaneously when you've really sold on yourself and you're really sold on your product and that it's valuable for somebody. A big problem that I had when I was in high school, and you can tell me if you had this as well, John, is that you're attracted to like some pretty girl or whatever, and you're always like, how come these dumb idiot dudes are the ones who end up with like the prettiest girls in my high school? This doesn't make any sense. Well, it's like, well, it's because these guys are sold on themselves, like right immediately. They're just like, yeah, I rock, I kick ass, and I'm not going to question the product. And what? And meanwhile, I'm intelligent enough to know I have flaws.
Right.
And so I'm like, why would an attractive girl like me? Like,
weren't sold on
exactly.
The product, basically.
I can see all the problems with the product.
Yeah.
But this other guy, he doesn't see any of them. And so it's funny because even though I can see his flaws, he doesn't see his flaws. So when he's selling himself, he's doing it at 110% because he's like, I got nothing to whatever. I'm awesome.
Right.
And what people, contextually, especially interpersonally, people don't have a lot to go off of except the cues that the other person is giving them. So, and this is true in comedy. Like if I get on stage and I act like I'm not really sure about this joke, the audience is going to be terrified because they're like, I don't know where this is going. And the same thing is true with a cold call. So if I get on the phone and I'm like, hey, yeah, I don't really, it's like, hey, look, maybe this doesn't apply to you, but we have a product that other people are, they're just going to be like, dude, I'm not wasting my time. This is so lame. So, that it's a difficult needle to thread. You have about 15 seconds on a cold call to say something to get somebody interested in talking with you further. But a big way to do that is just by tone. We talk about that a lot in the book. And another big way to do that is by just staying sold on your product.
That's great. we're running short on time, but before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you about something that happened around the time of the launch of this book. So you had a co-author who decided, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but hey, let's pick a fight with an American icon and a national treasure as a way of getting a little bit of extra promotion for the book. I don't know if that's exactly how it played out, but that's ultimately what happened. So tell us the story.
Yeah. Okay. So the guy who a friend of mine who's wrote the foreword for the book is a guy named James Altucher, and James, writer of a number of books. He has a big one coming out in February that called "Skip the Line," which actually has a chapter of our book in it. That's how sold he was on our book. And
Awesome.
But he's also the author of Choose Yourself and a number of other things. He's also a comic, which is how I know him. He owns the Stand Up New York comedy club on the Upper West Side of New York. So he decided to write an article literally like the same day that our book got published called "New York is Dead, ... Here's why." And he goes into, for a number of, I don't know how many words the article is, like,
It was a long article.
Yeah, it was like 3,500 words or something about how New York is dead. And he just inserts a whole bunch of facts basically about the city of New York and what's taking place. And he doesn't really have any hope. Like
and this was it was about August of 2020, about 5 months into the whole coronavirus pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's basically just talking about why New York is in a bad situation due to the coronavirus, and is citing commonly, publicly recognized stats about why people are leaving and these things. And the reason he ran into trouble, in our suspicion, that is me and my co-author suspect, is because he doesn't have any hope at the end of his article. It's just like, here's an argument for why New York's dead. Bye.
There is no solution. Yeah.
Peace.
Yeah.
He rolls out.
Right.
And so, in our political environment, that got picked up by the right-wing media. Glenn Beck, I think, read it on his show, where the concept, basically is that feeds a narrative that is commonly understood in the right wing, which is that cities are dying. And part of the reason they're dying is because they're run by these stupid
Democratic
libtards.
mayors.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Who are running them into the ground.
Right.
And so that got picked up. And as soon as Glenn Beck read it, I thought that would be the height of where it would go. But it kept picking up steam. The New York Post published it. And the New York Post has a dog in the fight also, in terms of commonly talking about what the bad things that are happening in New York. And then Jerry Seinfeld, the king of comedy, wrote an article in the New York Times, basically going straight at James Altucher for coming up with this. And he called him a putz.
Yep, he sure did.
He called him a putz. And then he talked about his club was a little shabby and needed some updates and stuff. So it was almost like, come on, Jerry.
Yeah. But what are your thoughts on who controlled the frame in that debate?
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the situation. It depends on who's answering that question, but I'll give you two perspectives. One is that Jerry has status in the situation. So we talk a lot about status in the book. Jerry has status globally, meaning he's more successful. His name is better known. He's his net worth is I think 10x or 25x what James's is. He obviously is higher in the hierarchy of comedy.
He's also identified with New York in many ways.
Yeah,
so him standing up for New York is expected.
Exactly. He's synonymous. I think Jerry Seinfeld in many ways is synonymous with the city of New York. And so he's stepping in from a status frame. Why is that important? It's important because James he's being out statused. So this is if Donald Trump tweeted at me being look at this stupid comedian with his dumb joke. And you're just wait a minute, what the fuck? The fact that it even bubbled up to affect Jerry was astounding,
Right. Right.
And it's strange because Jerry used it as a position to reinforce his status, and I think the status relative to the city. So it's the city needs a hero. Jerry Seinfeld's coming in and being that guy for a second.
Yeah.
But it also forced, because it was a status reframe, it forced Jerry to be unintelligible in his response. So it was Jerry couldn't address the specific points that James was making, because if he did, so remember the zoom in and zoom out, he had to zoom out. Jerry had to zoom out and say, the city's great. The city's amazing. It survived other things. It'll survive this. We don't need you right now. This is ridiculous. Your club is shabby.
Yeah.
Like,
which in many ways, actually get back to Trump, is a thing that Trump does too. He zooms out on debates all the time, doesn't provide specifics. Yeah. Yeah.
And when you zoom out far enough, when specifics do matter, 205,000 people die. So, it's like, I shouldn't
be laughing at that, but that's true. Yes. Yeah.
It's either it's that or crying, John.
Yeah.
So, but that's the truth, is that that is not a solution. That is a rhetorical trick, and sometimes it works. And that's why we talk about it. One of the things we talk about in the book a lot is that it's like, look, this is important. The understanding reframing and how to dismantle and, pressure flip and, pull a 180 and all these types of things, labeling, all that stuff we talk about in the book. Those are all techniques that are important, but they don't actually serve to necessarily elucidate the truth. You can be a sophist and you can actually do a kind of song and dance that'll cause somebody to lose face and be wrong. Jerry could do that, and which is basically what Jerry did. So your question was, who has frame in this situation? I think we better pay attention to James's frame in this situation. If you care about the city of New York, you should not be listening to Jerry Seinfeld right now. Like, James and Jerry are actually on the same side of this argument. The problem is that Jerry offers no solutions and references no data. So, like, is data funny? I don't know. I guess I can make some, you need specific points to make some jokes and stuff, but comedy is mostly attitude, and Jerry's response was only attitude. So, the issue here is, like, if I'm Bill de Blasio, I need to pay attention to James's article. He's referencing things that are relative. You know what I mean? Jerry, it doesn't matter how funny or how great the city of New York is or how funny Jerry Seinfeld is. 600,000 people have left the island of Manhattan. The city is not going to do well without those tax dollars. Yeah. Just right after that article, Bill de Blasio had to lay off a ton of city workers and furlough them. That's not, Jerry doesn't talk about that in his article. So anyway, I think that it depends on who you're talking to, but I think that James's frame is closer to the truth and should be paid attention to.
All right, well, let's. We're almost out of time, so we'll wrap things up with the question I always ask, which is, Brendon, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys, and you're receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. What we all want to know is, who do you thank? Who are the mentors? Who are the friends? Who are the business partners, colleagues? Who are the people that you would acknowledge in your remarks?
Yeah, what's I think the truth is, they would have to play the music so loud for me to get off stage at the Oscars.
For sure.
They would have to be like, because I would just keep going. I would thank a lot of people. I think, like, a big thing, honestly, is like this sounds dumb, but like my parents were huge influence on me. A guy named Bill McMurray, who is Bill, goodness gracious, Ben McMurray. I can't believe I just did that. Mr. McMurray, my close-up teacher, who was political science and economics, and my philosophy teacher in high school, was a big influence on me. As well as my uncle Mike McClure, who was the comedian who pushed me into doing comedy in high school. I think I would, it's shitty because I would just keep going. I would thank you, because I think you've been a great influence on me. I think I would thank Jordan Harbinger again, James Altucher. And then I would thank you, listener, for buying my book, because without you, I wouldn't be here accepting this Oscar today.
And with that, the book is The Power Bible, Brendon Lemon with an O, Brendon, lemon.com. I know it's one of your websites. Where else can people connect with you?
That's the easiest one. If you go to BrendonLemon.com, you can get a copy of my comedy special there. I've got it. I filmed it in 2016, just before the election, and I predicted Trump would win. So you can go check out Brendon Lemon is unbookable on BrendonLemon.com, and you can go pick up the Power Bible on Amazon, and the audiobook will be out soon. And if you want to check out that book there, I would encourage you to also check out Bill Petit on TikTok. He's my co-author. He's a fantastically interesting guy and another very funny comic, and you will like his content as well.
All right. Brendon, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.